I'll pull up our agenda. So for the record, so that everybody knows, Jonathan Draper is actually hosting, so he's in charge of the controls. Jonathan, you're muting everybody but the Board of Finance members?
I will do that right now.
Okay. And this is being recorded in accordance with Governor Lamont's Executive Order 7B. There'll be a recordation of this proceeding, and then we'll get the minutes posted within the timeline that's recorded. So we've been learning a lot over the last several weeks through how to conduct these meetings and some of the other presented. Bless you. So let's move right into the agenda, and then we can talk a little bit about the agenda is I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the regular meeting held February 18th, 2020. I would ask, before you make the motion, state your name and then the motion. So again, it's a motion to accept the minutes of the regular meeting held February 18th.
Lance Boynton, so moved.
Chris Bay is second.
Motion made by Mr. Boynton, seconded by Mr. Bayes. Are there any questions or comments on the minutes?
No.
Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion
This is
carries.
Mark, I abstain.
One
I
abstain. So we have board member Fushka and did I hear a second abstention? Anderson, thank you. And moving into item 2, I'll entertain a motion. It's just discussion. So just for the purposes of controlling the discussion, to listen to an update and discussion regarding the fiscal year 2021 budgets and deadlines. Do I have a motion?
Move discussion, Laureen.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Second, Mark.
Thank you. Seconded by board member Pushka. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. So quick update. I was typing some notes as I was sitting here, so I don't lose my line of thought. So just a quick update on where we are with the executive orders that have been coming down one every day for the past 30 days. Some of the important ones relative to the city of Torrington's budget, adoption, mill rate setting, taxation. So the budget adoption process was ordered under Executive Order 7I, where the governor recognized that some municipalities have charter-driven timelines that we're going to fit in with being able to meet as boards. So he allowed for a 30-day extension on the budget adoption process, but he also allowed for a budget adoption without a public hearing process. In many municipalities, budget adoption is done by a referendum or public referendum town meetings. That isn't the case in Torrington. However, our charter does require that there be one public hearing at least 10 days before budget adoption and mill rate setting. So recognizing that there would have to be some legislative action, in other words, the city council would have to decide whether they, number one, wanted to use a 30-day extension, which would bring us into the middle of June, or allow the Board of Finance to proceed with budget adoption without the public hearing process. And last night at the City Council, there was a unanimous agreement that it made sense to stay in the timeline that's driven by our charter and allow the Board of Finance to proceed without public hearing, so long as we do so with ample opportunity for there to be allowance for public comment. And again, this goes back to that first Executive Order 7B. So my proposal to the council, and now my proposal to the Board of Finance, is that we utilize a process that first and foremost will start with the publication of the school budget on the city's website, and that we will actively solicit public comment on the budget. We'll promote it through the newspaper, we'll promote it through social media, we'll put it on the front page as much as we can of the web page, with links so that there's an easy to read version of this budget for the public. And we'll do so over a 2-week period of time. And then 2 weeks from now, or a date as soon hereafter, we will proceed to a joint meeting with the Board of Education. It will most likely be an e-meeting, much like this, where there can be a Q&A. The board can do a full presentation of the budgets. There can be discussion on the budget, and much as we've done in the past, allow for there to be a dialogue. After that joint meeting, again, we'll put out the fact that the budget is published on the city's website, and we'll move to May 19th, which is the Board of Finance next regularly scheduled meeting, which is the week of that budget, charter-driven budget adoption date. And at that meeting, proceed with budget adoption and mill rate setting. So there'll be two-week windows for the public to see the city budget, Board of Ed and city budgets. And public comment will be shared. I think there was a public comment that was offered up before today's meeting. I'm not sure if you've all seen your emails, but we'll do the same thing. We'll offer those up as vehicles for public comment. So questions or concerns, suggestions? It's just a proposal. I'm willing to listen to any thoughts on this.
Jim Ryan, Eleanor, when would you expect that first Board of Ed presentation to be?
So I'm thinking if we were to schedule this 2 weeks from today, that is, or a date during that week, 2 weeks from now, that's the first week of May, then, and that falls in line with about the timeline that we have done this with the Board of Education in the past. When I first established the budget calendar, we were looking at April 30th for that joint meeting. So this would be, within a week of that time.
Mayor, I'll just comment quickly. I think that that's a great plan. It's always my goal to ensure that we have the maximum amount of transparency in this process. From A to B, I know this is a different setting and not the setting that we all prefer. We like to sit down with each other and discuss it and ask questions. But I think that as long as we can still accommodate the amount of meetings that we normally have in this capacity and still give the public that option to comment in writing and get things to us, I think that that's a great plan, and I'm in support of that.
Great. All right. Other thoughts?
Mayor Laureen, can we be sure that the Torrington Public Schools also promote this on their website?
Absolutely. I haven't checked to see. I know that that the superintendent's proposed budget was on their website. I haven't checked since the 15th when we received their budget as to whether or not it's up. I assume that it is. So yeah, this will be a full court press for us to get this out to the public so that we can be sure that everybody has a chance to speak to it. And again, utilizing social media and really pushing for public comment outside of that public hearing where everybody actually has to come to City Hall to be heard. I'm hopeful that we may even cast a wider net and get more comments as a result of this.
That would be a nice change.
I know. Yeah.
I think people are definitely more apt to submit writing, submit something in a written format too as well. It puts them on the record and gives them more opportunities, especially everybody being home to comment and get us their opinions.
And much like this meeting is with the joint meeting, there would not be public comment that is a part of that e-meeting. But the public can certainly phone in to the Zoom meeting. And just as I asked Jonathan, we would mute the public just so that we can control who's speaking. So there's a good conversation between the two boards.
I phoned in last night to the city council meeting and I could hear everybody very well.
Perfect. That's the goal. So that is the process with the Board of Education's budget. Now with the City Council, I was not looking to do the same process. I'm leaving that up to the Board of Finance. We could go that week after the joint meeting with the Board of Education and do a joint meeting with the City Council, in which case there would be a review of the department budgets. They seem to be comfortable knowing that the budget that has been delivered to the Board of Finance so far was essentially a wish list from each of the respective departments. There is yeoman's work for us to do. We've already had a number of meetings with department heads, bringing them back into something that's more in line with number one, the statutory requirement that we not exceed the 2.5% spending cap. But also recognizing that these are extraordinary times. And I know we've used that word in the past, but it's never been more extraordinary than it is this year. So the council said that they would certainly be comfortable waiting for the Board of Finance to make its determination on what it felt was a reasonable expectation for taxpayers, with a charge back to the council to find the cuts to meet that demand, and give them ample time to do that and bring it back.
Yeah, so Mayor, I can start on that as a budget subcommittee member, and we had one meeting in person before everything started to unfold here. And I think the theme, at least between the Board of Finance members in attendance and even some Board of Public Safety members and some council members, were pretty consistent in that 2.5% increase. You know, what we're looking for in each of these budgets, and what I'm looking for is what that 2.5% increase looks like, respectively. Obviously, I know that they each have their own specific, like you said, a wish list, a want list. But we'd really, for me to start to hone in on this, I'd really like to just see those 2.5% numbers. If there's room at the end of the day for a little more allowance in certain areas where, wherever we feel necessary, I'm sure that's something that we can discuss. But I think just as a matter of consistency and as a matter of sticking with what we've discussed so far, I think that I would personally like to see each of those respective boards and departments deliver on that, on capping their increases at 2.5% to see what that looks like. There may be some cases where we don't approve a 2.5% increase, but I think I'd like to see what that 2.5% looks like from every department and board.
All right. Other questions or comments, suggestions?
Well, 2.5% isn't zero.
It isn't.
Right.
And 2.5% would require a mill rate increase. So I think they also need to be thinking right now while they're doing that exercise, look at zero.
Do you know what the grand list went up percentage-wise?
So the grand list is up 2.42%. At this point, the Board of Assessment Appeals has not even started its work in regard to, keeping in mind this was a revaluation year. We were under a 30-day extension for the assessor to finish his work, which put the Board of Assessment Appeals out 30 days, and then the pandemic occurred. So we needed and solicited some clarification from the governor about the extension of time for the Board of Assessment Appeals to complete their work, and the loosening up the elimination of the requirement that those hearings be held in person. And that just occurred last week. So on Friday, Attorney Michelle, myself, the assessor Tom DeStasio, the chairman of the Board of Assessment Appeals and secretary of the board had a teleconference to talk about how we can start moving them forward with e-meetings and teleconferences. Some of the statutory ability they have to put off hearing any of the appeals for properties that are valued for more than $1 million. So we have a game plan moving forward that should bring them to about mid-May on hearings. So I'm hoping that by the 19th, we will have a pretty good picture of what that will look like as well.
And Mayor, sorry to jump back in, but I do want to go back to what I said before, and just I want to connect with Lorraine, because I do agree with what you're saying, kind of clarify what I said. I think that 2.5% is where each board and department respectively should start. That should be, I'm looking for, that's a maximum increase. That's what that's kind of your wish list at 2.5%, if that makes sense. And obviously, a lot of these budgets will have to be closer to zero, but at least that gives me a starting point to look at these budgets and say, okay, what in here, start looking at needs versus wants and what's respective to the mill rate. And it's my intention again to not see a mill rate increase for sure, and certainly if we can, to see a decrease. But obviously we'll get more I'll get more insight on that as we move further along in the process. But I agree with Lorraine. So
Mark, or should say Mr. Bushka, we're all in recording here.
Oh yeah.
Your question on what the grand list growth was, I'm assuming that you're just trying to get your head around, well, what does that mean? What does that translate to by way of additional revenues that will be available? So that is about $2.4 million in additional revenue for budget.
Same mill rate? At the same mill rate?
At the same mill rate, yes. Yeah. Maybe 2.5 million, I think, is where we would be with that. So, Alice Prue, our comptroller, and myself have been already sitting down looking at, what are those traditional funding streams that this board looks at year over year. And we would be prepared to bring proposals and the impact analysis for any of those proposals for the board to consider before the budget adoption and mill rate setting.
I just had a question about if there's any non-contractual savings for these various boards on the city side or the Board of Education side of things that haven't been done since the close down. Is there any money being saved that can be rolled over into their proposed budgets?
So the way that the way the budgets work is you don't really roll any of those savings from one year into the next. You close out a fiscal year, whatever is left over goes into the fund balance. And that's the analysis that the comptroller and I have been working on is, based on last year's year-end surplus, that gets returned to the general fund. Where are we in relation to what the general fund balance is and what our funding policy is? You will recall the board adopted the policy that our fund balance would always be maintained, between 7 and 10%. Where are we in relation to that policy? You know, how comfortable are we in using a fund balance for budgetary purposes? I'm looking at Mrs. Pesky as I say this because obviously using fund balance for operating is never advisable. However, if you can use any of that fund balance for those one-time expenses, such as those capital expenses that are one-time, they happen once every 10 years. It's a way for us to return the taxpayers' dollars to them in a way that's responsible and doesn't create a hole in the following year. So still a little bit of work to do on those. But to answer your question, that's been the strategy. That is the strategy when we do municipal budgeting.
Yeah, so just piggybacking off what Mr. Wright said, I think that it's responsible at this point, Mayor, if we can see this kind of, not in real time, but in the near future, in the next couple of weeks, individually, whether it's from the Board of Education, the police department, how exactly this situation is affecting their budget. I think that that is an important element that this board should be looking at, just so, you know, we're up to date with, you know, where's money being saved or spent in the Board of Ed, or where's more money being spent in the fire department or the police department, you know, as sort of an impact analysis, just so we kind of know where we stand for the year end. I think that's something I'd like to see. And I don't know if anybody else would like to see that, but something I'd like to see.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I think one of the places that'd be interesting is the overtime allotments for the different departments. Obviously, the amount of traffic is way down. Hopefully, the traffic accidents are down and things that cause a lot of the overtime budget for the municipality. I'm hoping that, you know, we're gaining a little bit of a reprieve on that side.
And although it was snowing a few minutes ago here at my house,
Same here.
I'm thinking that the street department might have some money too.
We had a mild winter, yes, yeah. So what we'll do is I'll reach out to the Board of Education. You do have their financial reports. Those are the budget performance reports available. Those are next on the agenda for approval, actually. And what we'll do is when we have the joint meeting, I'll just ask them to do a little bit of a report out on budget performance for the current fiscal year. You know, it's hardly an indicator of what can happen next year. We don't know. You know, we hope this pandemic is winding down, that it doesn't rear its ugly head again in the fall. And our school board is once again stressed to develop, you know, more online e-learning, finding ways to provide all of the resources to those families. I can't say enough how challenging and impressive it was to see our school administrators pull this together, get those computers out there. Develop a whole educational model that we just didn't have. And while it still may not be perfect, it is a feat to be commended, to say the least. So before that Board of Ed, Board of Finance joint meeting, we'll make sure that that's a piece of the agenda for that discussion as well.
I think just the performance reports, at least for me, are just kind of, they're very broad in general, especially the categories. So I'd like to just see something a little more specific to this situation with, you know, I know that a lot of, probably most close to all the staff is still employed and still working, especially the teachers, and still being paid, and the contractual obligations are still being held. But I'd like to see, you know, just the other side of it, what's happening, you know, on the maintenance side with the buildings and costs that way. So.
Okay, absolutely. For both the city and the Board of Ed.
Yeah, for both the city and the Board of Ed. Yeah, I think it just, you know, it doesn't even have to be anything super crazy. Just kind of like I said, like an impact analysis, so we can really take a look and see, you know, what happened here and how it affects, you know, the year end and
right.
everything.
Nope.
If nothing else, we can get a little lessons learned and do a better job of planning for the next unknown.
words of wisdom, to say the least. There's so much that we're learning from all of this that none of us ever thought we'd have to learn in our lifetimes. But you're right. I mean, it's just another component of planning that, that should be a part of our discussions. All right, so if everybody's comfortable with that process, then I'll start reaching out to find a mutually convenient date with the Board of Education. And then we'll get that scheduled. In the meantime, I will go ahead and publish the Board of Education's budget, which we do have, on the website, and I'll start promoting that on multiple platforms. All right, moving into item 3, I'll entertain a motion to accept the Board of Education financial reports for February and March of 2020.
Jim Wright, so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Chris Bayes.
Second,
Miss Pesky beat me to it.
second,
Aye.
Lori.
Are there any questions on the reports, or hearing none? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 4. Item 4. I'll entertain a motion to consider business by department heads.
So moved. Chris Bayes.
Thank you, Chris.
Second, Mark Bushka.
Thank you, Mark. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so I think I saw on the line, I'm not sure if Alice is on the line. She may just have called in. If Alice, is there anything that you needed to add?
Can you hear me, Mayor?
We can, yes.
Yep. No, I have nothing this evening. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Al.
And
Thank you.
not sure, can't see any of the other department heads, so we'll move into item 5. I'll entertain a motion to consider business by the mayor and members of the Board of Finance.
Jim Wright, so moved.
Chris
Thank you.
Bayes.
And seconded by Chris Bayes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, so I'll open this to the floor. Anything this evening, Mr. Wright?
No, I just think you're doing a stellar job. I think the whole town is holding up very well, and congratulations, or thank you very much. And caregivers and everybody seems to be doing their part, and we'll get through this.
I appreciate that. You're right. I think that this community has really done a great job of working together to get us through this. Mr. Boynton, anything this evening?
The current situation obviously is challenging everybody. Mr. Briscoe was, talking about the grand list a little bit earlier. And I think one of the challenges that we're going to have is on the backside of this, as we start to open up again, are there going to be long-term impacts? Are we going to actually lose businesses because of this? I know there's a couple manufacturing companies in town that are desperately trying to hire. Things are going well. They're on the front line trying to make PPE and have switched gears a little bit. But I'm looking at our food industry. I'm looking at service industry, and with the PPP program basically going bankrupt in a week, I don't know if anybody in Torrington, any of the small businesses, and the reality is it's all small businesses in Torrington, got any of those dollars. So on the back side of this, as we start to open, I'm really concerned this year more than any other year, and I've always been concerned about an increase in the mill rate. I'm concerned that we're going to have a slow recovery for some organizations, and it's going to be extremely prudent on this board to be very diligent on the dollars that we spend this year. And I think we've all got a pretty big challenge ahead of us. So to piggyback on what Ms. Pesky said earlier, I don't think 2.5 is a starting point or an ending point. I think 2.5 is kind of off the table this year, and it really is a 0, because this is going to impact, it already has impacted vast numbers of our constituents. And I think we need to kind of step up like our service people have and kind of put a line in the sand this year. And we just don't have the money to do this.
I appreciate that. Mr. Bayes.
Just reaffirm first, Mayor, thank you. I know I've seen your schedule the past few weeks, and I just want to commend you on a job well done. You know, it's often that leaders often just lead and don't take time to take a break and don't get the commendation that they deserve. But we're lucky to have you serving for us, and really just want to thank you for the work you've done. I've had the pleasure of traveling the Litchfield County area delivering masks for an organization over the past few weeks, and just I can't say enough how fantastic the Torrington community is. You know, politics aside, money aside, this community is fantastic. This community cares about one another, and not enough can be said for those who continue to serve no matter what. So like I said, I want to thank you, and I want to echo what Lance said as well. I think I made it clear before, but I don't expect to support a mill rate increase either at this point, and was hopeful at the beginning of this process for a decrease. But obviously we'll see where we are closer to the end. But thank you again, and thank all my fellow members for being here and continuing to serve as well.
Thank you. Well said. Mr. Anderson. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah.
You can't be unmuted?
Oh,
Thank you, John.
There it is.
We're all still learning the new software, and depending on who presses mute and when, sometimes you can't unlock yourself. So I wasn't being quiet on purpose, I promise. But no, I mean, I think we're all doing the best we can in a difficult time, and I don't love the idea of the perception of lack of public comment, but I think whatever reasonable accommodations we can make to make sure the town is involved is good. It's something that we've requested for the last couple of years, whether there's talk of 2.5 now or later or what have you. At some point, everyone should have, if they're not coming back up to the table with a zero increase, they should, or I would request that they bring in the schedule showing how we get from what their first ask is down to zero. We've done that with some of the departments in the past, and it is very helpful to see what zero costs. So it may be early for that in the process, but everyone should have that in the back of your mind that the board will certainly want to see that again this year.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Thank you.
Mr. Bushka.
I'd just like to go back to what we were talking about as far as any costs, actual cost savings realized from the situation. But I'd also like to see what additional costs as a result of the pandemic. And in my opinion, if we take that money out of our fund balance, assuming it's a one-time thing, I mean, I wouldn't have an issue with that. So that's just my feeling as far as that goes. And that's about it, really.
So just to answer that quickly, where we are right now, Gina Casper, our deputy controller, has been tasked with tracking all of our COVID-related expenses, everything from additional cleaning supplies, any of the safety measures, whether it was masks or hand sanitizers. We did need to bring in for a short period of time an additional custodian because the City Hall custodian was out taking care of an ill parent. So though that is an expense that is COVID related, I know on the school board side, there were expenses directly related to online or distance learning, including the establishment of hotspots where there may not have been internet service available to families. But all of that is being tracked. And the goal with all of that tracking is that all of those expenses will be submitted to FEMA. And there is a ratio that will be a percentage that will be reimbursable. So far, I can't speak for what the Board of Education has had to expend yet, but the FEMA grant showed this in a couple of chunks, like the small projects, anything from 3,000 to 131,000. And so far, I think that we're in that ballpark right now. We haven't had extraordinary expenses because this pandemic really has hit that older population, our nursing home, the hospital. So from a municipality, it hasn't been that awful. But I can make sure that the Board of Finance sees what all those expenses are, and we can send a report out to you for that. So, and I don't want to speak too early because, while, we see glimmers of hope, that people are being released from the hospital and recovering, we also know that there's still a stretch of this ahead of us. So, all right,
Cool.
Ms. Pesky. I'm sorry, did you have any more comments or questions? Okay. All right, Ms. Pesky.
Mayor, have any city employees been laid off or had their hours reduced or pay cut as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, so none of the union positions were furloughed or laid off. What we did is we were able to maintain all the essential function of the departments up until 3 weeks ago, when that last executive order recommended that we not have, a crowd or a group of more than 5. We looked at every single department and we identified through the continuity of operations plan what component of each of those departments could be done at home, a teleworking situation. So we staggered some of the shifting so that we reduced the number of employees in each department, and also ensured continuity so that if there was an exposure in the city clerk's office, we wouldn't see 4 employees in one key department go down, but perhaps only 2 that were consistently working together would be exposed. A good cleaning, a couple days of relocating to some swing space in City Hall, and then, ramp up the regular functions in the department. So no furloughs, no layoffs. However, in any of those programmatic pieces, like the teen center, yes, we did furlough those employees. By furlough, I mean they're not working, not being paid. We had some part-time staff in our Parks and Rec department that are not working, not being paid. But we continue to keep them, keep in touch with them and check in with them for obvious reasons. Once things ramp up again, we'll look at each one of those particular positions and decide, when's the right time to bring them back.
Do you know what the situation is on the Board of Ed side? Have they laid off, furloughed, cut anybody's hours or pay?
No, to the best of my knowledge, that they've implemented the same strategies. Their administrative teams are doing the same thing. They're staggering schedules where they can telework. They're teleworking. Obviously the teachers and the paras are all still working with children, doing distance learning. So the custodians I know are still in the buildings. I don't believe there are any furloughs or layoffs. We can certainly reach out and see if we can get an answer.
Thank you.
Can I add a comment to that, or a question, I should say? This is Lance.
Sure.
Lance Boynton. The bus schedules, are we under contract to pay, although those buses are not running?
Yes. Yeah, so it's it was one of the questions that I did reach out to the school superintendent. The governor did issue an executive order that he wanted the school boards to continue to pay those contracts for obvious reasons. When you're facing the unprecedented number of unemployed individuals filing for unemployment claims. What the governor was trying to do was preserve any of those functions that could be preserved, especially if the funds had already been budgeted. But I will definitely reach out to the superintendent and get a report on that as well.
Thank you.
Well, given that it appears for the most part, city employees and Board of Ed employees have been kept whole
Yeah.
in this situation, I would appreciate that we reach out to the unions and that the Board of Ed reaches out to their unions and that we look at some sort of a deferral of increases for next year so that no staff would continue to have to lose their positions. I know that the Board of Ed was looking at some reconfiguring and losing some teacher positions. I think it's going to be even more important that everybody stay employed across the city and across the Board of Ed. There's going to be a lot of catching up on the school side that's going to need to happen. And I'm a broken record. This is something that I ask for every year. But in terms of when we're talking, and it appeared that, you know, the six of us all appeared to be at the 0 mill rate increase, that if there's a way to do that and maintain all the staff and look at deferring, those are negotiated contracts, but if there could be a deferral of those wage increases, the fact that we've got the 53-week pay cycle for the 2021 budget that's nothing that we can change. The insurance, anybody that's got insurance knows that it's going to go up because there are too many people without insurance that are still getting treated. So that money's got to come from somewhere. So I would request that a formal process of reaching out to the unions be made on the part of both the city and the Board of Ed.
Okay, so duly noted, and I think that you're right. If what we're looking at by way of budget adoption and mill rate setting is to not overly burden the taxpayers, but also recognizing that layoffs is a part of that economic recovery, we could certainly look at all of that and bring back some proposals as to how we can meet those demands from the Board of Finance. I hear you.
I know that the governor they're looking at legally if the office of the governor has the power to put off, in the state's case, it's millions of dollars of, again, negotiated increases that happened under the previous administration. Vic, that's not something that would be within the charter, that the office of the mayor could institute that kind of a wage?
Lorraine, the mayor doesn't have that kind of power. I'm not sure the governor does either, for that matter.
Exactly.
Right. It's really a function of, that whole function falls on the city council as to whether or not that kind of request we've made. The city council and the mayor are the bargaining agents. And I think the other thing to think about with regard to those kinds of decisions is the city is pretty much self-insured for unemployment. So any layoffs or furloughs is going to be charged to the city anyway. So you don't ever save much money in doing that. So I think it really has to be an analysis of what it is that we want to do and what is the result of doing it, because sometimes you shoot yourself in the foot. You got to be careful, but it really it's something to be
thought about, but the mayor doesn't have the power to do that. It's really would be and the other problem is we have contracts that have already been negotiated, so those contracts are in place.
Oh,
So
no,
we-
I understand that. I
There's no
understand.
way to do that without an agreement.
No, it has to be collectively bargained, and it would be an MOU too. But given that so many people have lost their jobs, and who knows when they're going to come back, and the same with our businesses in the community, anything that we can do to mitigate the effect on our taxpayers this year. I don't quite understand. It's hard for me to read the newspapers and read the other communities are, talking about continuing to increase their budgets and Board of Ed budgets and their towns and budgets. But as usual, we're the city for the Northwest corner, and our situation is different and needs to be looked at somewhat differently, I think.
Well, I think you're right, Lorraine. I think there's so many, in my view, there's just so many unknowns at this point. So it's hard to determine what is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. As the mayor indicated, we don't understand yet what the reimbursement is going to be from the federal government for cities and towns. I understand Congress is passing something today for that. Secondly, the other programs from Congress, the Paycheck Protection Plan, where people have been receiving paycheck protection, or unemployment benefits, where unemployment benefits are now $600 more than you would normally receive. So you got to think about the people who have been laid off, but who have been getting unemployment compensation that exceeds even what they were earning before. So there's just so many unknowns. There's a lot of speculation, and I think as the weeks play out to the budget making process, we'll have more information to make those kinds of decisions.
Thank you.
As I'm watching the news scroll by here, did just say the Senate just approved that pact, which another $310 billion for paycheck protection, reimbursement for state and local municipalities and other stuff. So we'll see more on that as time goes on.
So along those lines, when we talk about what those stimulus packages are, and whether or not our businesses are receiving any of the benefits of those, I will tell you that right from the first week, when we started talking about what was our response going to be for, response to the healthcare needs, I immediately charged our economic development director with starting to develop a recovery plan. This isn't something you wait until you're 3 weeks into it. So 3 weeks ago, we did mail letters to every single business that is registered as a business in the city of Torrington. Anybody who has a business received a letter from the city of Torrington and the chamber. We joined forces with Joanne Ryan from the chamber to do this outreach, because over and over what we are hearing from our small businesses, our mom and pop, is that they can't get in to register and receive any of those stimulus packages fast enough. When you get an email at 9 o'clock in the morning that says, the payroll protection plan is available, and at 10:30 in the morning it's closed. Our small businesses are just not able to mobilize themselves fast enough. You have to have an idea of what they're looking for. When I can tell you, there is one business in Torrington that did receive that bridge loan that was offered, but she's an accountant in Torrington. She pretty much knew what they were looking for, and she pretty much had all of her information right there and available to her. So our small businesses, they don't have that business acumen. They don't have that grant application acumen. So our next strategy is to look at that Building Healthy Communities grant fund that we received And I just had this conversation with Joanne and Rista yesterday to try to talk about how do we bring those resources together so that our small businesses, now we're looking at our economic development office in a way that provides them those additional resources, that gives them the checklist. What do you need right there in front of you, so that at 9 o'clock, when that program is released to the public, they're ready to hit the send button and not the what do I need to pull together to apply. So we're working with small businesses on that to try to mitigate any of those losses. And when I say losses, we are hearing those small businesses are talking about not being able to recover from this, that they are closing their doors and they will not be able to open them again. And unfortunately, some of those businesses are right on our main street. So we're struggling with that. Along with that is, the other incentives or other programs that are more immediate and municipally driven. So last night, the city council we are required to adopt one of two tax relief programs. This was under Governor Lamont's Executive Order 7S. The options were a reduction in the interest rate that is charged on delinquent taxes, or a tax deferral program, a 90-day tax deferral, which is really an extended grace period. So the taxes are still due July 1st, but they have until October 1st to pay them. After a lot of analyses with of the two programs, we did determine that it would be most beneficial for the city, and the city council did adopt this program last night, to go with that 90-day tax deferral program. We were not concerned about a cash flow problem, as some municipalities are, because between our fund balance and the fact that 42 or 46% of our taxes that are paid in that first installment come from escrow accounts, mortgage escrow accounts, we felt that there was ample cash flow not to worry about a 90-day deferral. We opted for that deferral program to be offered to eligible taxpayers, those taxpayers that are suffering that loss of revenue, because of unemployment, because of the loss of business, or for landlords that can demonstrate that there's a commensurate forbearance, that they've provided to their tenants. So that program we'll be taking applications for that program between now and July 1st. We'll be working with our tax collector's office. In doing so, our tax collector, TTC LLC, of course, we're the only municipality with a private tax collector. So this was going to have an impact on the contract with them. Attorney Michelle, myself, Lana Gosley, and the principals of TTC LLC had a number of telephone conversations, Zoom meetings, and TTC LLC once again stepped up to the plate, as they did in 2016 when motor vehicle taxes were not being collected on July 1st as they should have been, and agreed to work with the city in processing those applications and to mitigate any losses the city may have, or losses the tax collector may have on the interest that would not be collected, by capping those losses at $40,000 between now and October 1st. So we'll be monitoring what those actual losses are, but we're insured for $40,000 with that cap. We also agreed to extend that November 1st, or the first Monday of November, final settlement date for the first installment. We extended that for 2 months to the first Monday of January, for obvious reasons, with coming in for the tax collector to do a final settlement with the city. we felt it was only fair to give them that opportunity to settle up with the city. So instead of a 90-day extension, they accepted a 60-day extension. The only other thing that I can offer up by way of mitigation is that we're continuing to reach out to these businesses, continuing to do what we can to gauge where they are in any of the decisions that they have to make, and continuing to work with our department heads to help us recognize where there may be additional revenue opportunities that we haven't thought of, moving forward with online permitting to see if that loosens up some of the log jam with the lack of ability to access the building for building permits or burn permits or any kinds of land use permitting. So thinking out of the box as much as we can and, being as creative as we can.
One more question, Mayor. As I was reviewing the minutes, the whole parking meter thing and the 6.35% sales tax on the parking meters was, now 2 months ago, feels like a lifetime ago. Was a change made? I know the legislature hasn't met, and now I just understand that they're not going to meet. So are we still obligated to provide the 6.35% sales tax?
We are.
Okay.
Yeah, and the parking meters were approved for purchase, and the implementation of the increase to collect the 6.35% was implemented as well.
Okay. Because
Although
I knew
there's
there had been a 2 months. They had put it off for 2 months.
Yes, and the cost of that was coming out of what would have been meter revenue to offset parking expenses. So we covered that first 2 months. Actually, I think it ended up being 3 months. But to be honest with you, nobody's parking downtown. Our main street is empty. There's no parking revenue being collected and no tax being collected right now. I'm hoping to see all of that change. It's for us right now, it is from one Monday to the next, that we're making decisions. Do we extend a staggered schedule for another week? Do we talk about things like the Memorial Day parade? Do we dare think about, if school is not if it's not called back into session, but the economy is opened up. How do we address the needs of those families who now have children that are home with no school, and their daycare needs are going to be increased? So part of all of that recovery discussion that we're having already. Is that your clock?
Time?
That's mine, sorry.
No, it's cocktail hour.
I was gonna say, mine's a cuckoo clock, so you would have heard a lot of cuckooing. Do you, if there are no other questions for me, nothing else you want me to pull together before we get together with the Board of Education? And certainly email me. If there's something that you think that we didn't hit on today that you need, we can have it for you at the next meeting. So I'd be looking for meeting in the next 2 weeks, 21, 24 days. There's no other business before the board. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Wright. Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
Thank you, Mr. Bayes. All right. Those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you all. Continue
Stay safe.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe, everybody.
Bye.